Dr. Ellen Langer, PhD, is a social psychologist and the first female professor to gain tenure in the psychology department at Harvard University. She is the author of 11 books and more than 200 research articles written for general and academic readers on mindfulness for over 35 years. Her best-selling books include Mindfulness, The Power of Mindful Learning, On Becoming an Artist, Reinventing Yourself Through Mindful Creativity, and Counterclockwise. I believe that my great friend, mentor, Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, gave the title to Dr. Ellen Langer, the mother of positive psychology. I am truly honored to have spent some time with Dr. Ellen Langer, and I want to share this with you folks. Very first printed copy of my book, Habits and Happiness, I shared with Dr. Langer. She was so kind to read my book, and actually we exchanged a number of emails. In one of them, she said to me, quote, "It's a nice book. The problem with my endorsing it is that to me habits, whether good or bad, are mindless," unquote. I kept thinking about this for a long time. I wanted to say for years. It sounded like years. I kept thinking about this for a long time and realized that I need to discuss this even further with Dr. Langer. Yes, I understand that habits are mindless, but I also think in order to establish them, you need to be mindful. But I really needed to talk to Dr. Langer. So she was so kind to find the time to talk to me. And in this interview, you will hear about mindfulness, mindlessness, her great art, and the way that she approaches the art, as well as her view on habits. So enjoy.
Thank you so much. I cannot tell you how honored I am to how much I appreciate, because there are very few people in your world who would just openly do this with someone like who's not in academia. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're very welcome.
I would like to divide quickly in about 3 parts, if it's okay, just to have discussion, general discussion and questions. Talk about a little bit mindfulness and habits, because you really got me thinking when you were giving me feedback on my book, and discuss a little bit your art and other books. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Perfect. So I believe that mindfulness and mindlessness is the term that you and your colleagues coined years ago.
Yes. And, my work started with the study of mindlessness, so it was natural to just turn it around to get to mindfulness. Buddhism have talked about mindfulness, but that's mindfulness that results from meditation. And they beat me by quite a distance in the use of the term mindfulness.
Thank you so much.
But I brought it to the Western world, I believe.
Thank you. Yes, I actually have the first copies of your book Mindfulness in front of me, and
the 25-year anniversary edition of that book comes out in the end of October.
End of October. That's great. Thank you. We'll make sure that people, if they haven't, and even if they have read the original, to read the 25 years anniversary one. I think very few people talk to you, and they don't mention your famous 1959 researches, though.
No, actually, that's a very popular study now. That's the study where I took old men to a retreat that was retrofitted to 20 years earlier. The experiment that I ran there, I did a program with the BBC. It was replicated then in London, in the Netherlands, and in South Korea. And the people who you're writing to should know that they can go to my new website, which is LangerMindfulnessInstitute.com, because we're running those retreats for people of all ages now.
That is so beautiful. So how do you, when you run these retreats, the new ones, do people know where they're going? Do they know about your research?
Sure. You know, that the retreats we're running now aren't research. They're just to make available the possibility of people getting the same results that we got in the research.
That's so interesting. You know, you talk about in that your old work, you also talk about placebo and, you know, can really train ourselves to become mindfulness of
Yes.
the process in our own bodies. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I'm really fascinated with that.
Yeah, well, I report that lots of this research in the book Counterclockwise, Mindful Health and the Power of Possibility. And essentially, lots of the studies test what I call the mind-body unity theory. The mind and body are just words. If we put them back together, wherever we put the mind, we're necessarily putting the body. So if the mind is in a healthy place, so too will the body be, and that explains things like placebos and spontaneous remissions. But there's much more that I cover in that book that shows people how they can improve their health, and that what we should be doing is be active participants at the least in our health care.
You also, in your book Counterclockwise, talked about labels, mindless and
yeah,
mindful.
what happens is that people mistakenly seek certainty. And one of the ways we do this is we label things that allows us to hold it still, even though it's actually changing. We respond to the label rather than to what's really happening. So labels lead us to be mindless. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't use labels. We should use them as guides to understand things rather than absolute facts.
And you also talked a lot about the context and you know, the control over context. Like,
Yeah. Now, years ago, personality psychologists believed that who we were and how we behaved was a function of our personalities. Social psychology believed, and the two have melded, believed that our behavior is a function of context. So that if you tend to be extroverted, even the most extroverted among us, in a context where they're talking to authority figures, may in fact be introverted rather than extroverted. So context matters. The question I raise, which is who decides the context? So that if we're in a situation where we want to behave in a particular way, we need to pull out aspects of that context that will help us behave that way. So, for example, if you're in a hospital, that context usually leads people to be subservient and quiet. If you have a loved one that's in the hospital, and they tell you you can't visit this person except for the prescribed visiting hours, but you think it's best and the person in the hospital wants you to visit on other hours, then what you do, you create the context, that this is, let's say, your mother, and you're going to do whatever is best for her, rather than this is a hospital where you have to follow the rules. So in other words, context is potentially created by us rather than we as victims of whatever the culture had taught us.
I love that. I love that idea. By the way, I love your art and your.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, so simple. And in your book on becoming an artist, reinventing yourself through mindful creativity, this is what you talk about. Can you tell us a little bit about, yourself, so just anybody who can, as I believe your thought is, just can, do the art as long as you just start doing the art.
Right. The way to be an artist is to do art. And that if you're true to yourself, then no one can do it better. No one can do a better you than you. And it's when we're trying to be like other artists, other people, that we don't enjoy the process as much. We have to recognize that the rules to art, like any other rules, are just person-derived. They're not handed down from the heavens. and that we also need to know that, let's take the Impressionists, for example, that where these paintings now can get easily millions of dollars for them, they were initially rejected at their time. So that the standards keep changing, and that one should engage in art just because it's a mindful activity. So, for example, let's say you drew a dog. Rather than get disgusted with yourself, say this looks nothing like a dog, and then forget the activity, you look at the dog, you look at your drawing, and you see what is it that you didn't get right. And you might have put the nose, for example, higher up on the dog's face where a person's nose would be. So then you move it down. And so the art of drawing is teaches you how to see. Now, you can learn how to see whether you draw or not. So I think I said in that book that when I first started painting, I didn't see all there was to see. To me, leaves were green. And then as I started painting, I saw, well, there are thousands of different shades of green. And it became more interesting because the process of being mindful is noticing new things. And as you're looking and you're noticing new things, that's literally and figuratively enlivening. It's the essence of being mindful. So pursuing art is one way of increasing your mindfulness, and it's great fun. And in the Unbecoming book, I make clear that we should not be afraid of doing this. I was not anybody that, I couldn't draw. I still probably can't draw that well. And it hasn't stopped me. I'm in several galleries, and the whole process for me is great fun. But the Unbecoming an Artist book is really only secondarily about art. What it's really about is interpersonal mindfulness. And it's a funny story, actually, because I had sent the book to the publishers, Random House, with the title Mindful Creativity. They came back with the title Unbecoming an Artist. At that time, it was early in my painting, and I was so excited about being called an artist, I said, okay, that's great. So what happens is that there are many people who would prosper, I think, from reading the book that probably it wouldn't occur to them to buy it because they think it's just about art.
Well, I think anything that we see from you, we will buy it and we should read it.
Okay, that's very nice.
We know it's much more than anything the title says, and sometimes the titles are not. You know, when you mentioned the title, first of all, I really want to thank you so much for reading my book and giving me the feedback. And I know you said, you thought it was a nice book, and you said the habits, good or bad, are mindless, and I recommend we eliminate them to be happy. And
yes.
You also recommended, and I wish I talked to you before, to call this book Mindfulness versus Habits, as opposed to Habits and Happiness.
Yeah.
Can you please tell us, what do you mean? Because I have a little bit, maybe even a little bit confused, because I'm thinking that habits, they are definitely mindlessness, but I believe that in order to establish them, we need to be mindful. I might be wrong.
That we need to what?
That we need to be mindful in order to establish the habits, and then...
Yeah, no, I don't think that we ever want to be mindless. I don't think, and habits are mindless. That we want to always be there. If you're going to do something, you want to show up for it. And so I think that, and when you have something as a habit, what that means is you think you've mastered it, and you're going to freeze the way you do it, right? You just keep doing it the same way over and over again. And no matter what it is, even if it's a matter of happiness, the assumption that you've achieved the highest form of this happiness that can be achieved is mindless. So you want to always be in a state of growing, and that growing is not possible when it's a habit. So certainly positive habits are going to be better than negative habits, but still you're better off not having any habits, I believe.
How about
I only have time for one more.
Yes, I'm sorry. Just one more. How about the mindfulness? What can we do to become more mindful? And just based on your experience, what can we do to become more mindful?
Well, I've written now 5 books telling people how to do that. That essentially, once we recognize, and this is explained in the counterclockwise book,
Yes.
once we recognize that we really don't know, people think they know, but they don't know. An example I use is even how much is 1 and 1? And everybody thinks it's 2, but 1 and 1 isn't always 2. If you take 1 wad of chewing gum, you add it to 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 plus 1 is 1.
Yeah.
So when you notice new things, that shows you that you don't know that thing you thought you knew as well as you thought you knew it, and then your attention will naturally go to it. So what we want to do is become more comfortable with uncertainty. Then we will be more mindful. We'll notice new things, and as we notice new things, the neurons are firing, and again, it's literally and figuratively enlivening.
Dr. Langer, thank you very,
My
very
pleasure.
much. I cannot tell you how much I'm grateful for time, and it will keep me this joy and happiness for a long time. Say hello to your students. Have fun in your program, in your class.
Thank you very much. You take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye now.